we wanted to stop sharing, then we would.
Okay.
So I think also we have to do is just once she starts it, then I'll just start
hit the
clicking through the slides all.
Good. That's funny.
Well, welcome everyone. We will be starting the program very soon. And before we do, and as people are coming into the chat, into the room, I'd like to get you thinking about this afternoon's topic. So if you could type in the chat box how you irrigate your edible garden, whether you do it by hand, sprinklers, soaker hose, drip irrigation. So type that in the chat box. We'll be starting shortly. Our talk today is about irrigating your edible garden. So I'm asking people to put in the chat box how they do irrigate their edible garden. I'm seeing people are doing it. Some are doing it by drip irrigation, some by hand, some by soaker hoses. So we have a variety of options right now. And we'll be talking about all of those in the talk. And especially at the end, we'll be talking about drip irrigation, another one by hand. So we will be starting the program at noon, so in about 3 minutes. And as I said, our talk today is about irrigating your edible garden, your vegetable garden. And I'd like to have people put in the chat box how they irrigate their edible garden, whether they do it by hand, sprinklers, soaker hose, drip irrigation. Another drip. Thank you for coming to today's edible gardening seminar series on irrigation. We'll be starting the program in about 2 minutes. So those of you that are just joining us now, we're asking people to put in the chat box how you irrigate your edible garden, whether you do it by hand, sprinkler, soaker hose, drip irrigation. So how you irrigate your edible garden, put in the chat box. Another watering by hand. So it seems very common that people water by hand and sprinkler, hand or soaker, but really want to do the drip. Okay, we'll be talking certainly about that. Watering by hand, another one. So a lot of people are watering their edible gardens by hand. So we're going to give you some other options today. Drip and by hand, as to how you might water your edible gardens, perhaps more efficiently. So I think we're at noon, so we're going to start the program. Drip with a five gallon bucket, I guess that was. So hello, my name is Juliet Bender, and I'm a member of the OSU Lane County Master Gardeners. And I'd like to welcome you to our edible gardening seminar series, of which this is the fourth talk. All of these seminars will be recorded and posted on our YouTube channel. Questions will be handled at the end of the talk, but feel free to put any questions in the Q&A box. That's the Q&A box at any time. And I will coordinate those questions at the end. Also, for today's talk, closed captioning is available. It can be turned on or off with the CC button at the top of your screen or at the bottom, depending on your computer. I think that's all the housekeeping issues for today. So I'd like to introduce our two speakers. We have Ron Cangel and Richard Gordon, who will be speaking about the basics of irrigating your edible garden and how to create a drip irrigation system. Richard has been an OSU Lane County Master Gardener since 2022. In addition to the edible gardening group, he has been active in answering questions in our plant clinic and mobile plant clinic and helping with our plant sales. Ron completed the Master Gardening training this year and has been active in answering questions also in our plant clinic and participating in the edible gardening group. So I'm going to turn it over to Ron first to talk about the basics for irrigating your edible garden, and then Richard will talk a little bit later about drip irrigation. So Ron, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Juliet, for the introduction, and welcome to all of you to our irrigation webinar today. We hope to give you a little bit more background and education and information on just how it is to be able to understand the watering needs of a vegetable garden. And we'll go into a lot more detail with the ways that you can do that and how to be more efficient with it. So irrigation is the practice of applying controlled amounts of water to land to help grow crops, landscape plants, and lawns. In the United States and globally, there's a water crisis. The world's wetlands are disappearing. We're seeing inefficient commercial agriculture methods used. And since 2000, the US has been in a drought. And this is mainly or mostly affecting the Latinos, Blacks, and Indigenous communities and immigrants, people with low incomes in rural areas, and have a poor water and sanitation system. Oregon's groundwater is being used faster than it's being replenished, and the state's aquifers are declining. And I'm sure because we've got people coming from all around the United States, you're seeing similar situations with your groundwater. It's been a problem in many states, and it continues to get worse every year. A little background and history of irrigation. It's been 9,000 years ago, the Fertile Crescent, Turkey, Syria, Jordan on the map here, Israel, Iran, Iraq, Cyprus, Egypt, Palestine, and Lebanon. This goes back to the Tigris and Euphrates and the Nile. They irrigated a lot of those areas and had systems set up to be able to move that water into the areas where they were trying to grow their crops to be able to survive. So some of the practices that they used 9,000 years ago are ones that we can use today to help us to be able to do a better job of irrigating our crops and be able to conserve the water as much as possible. Plants and trees are made up as much as 95% water. So that's why it's so critical for us to be able to get the maximum out of that water that we put into our plants. The water carries nutrients through the stems to the leaves. The water keeps the plants cool through evaporation. Garden watering needs in the Pacific Northwest. Now, again, we're talking about Pacific Northwest, but you can use this in a lot of the areas where you're at too. Even though we're in the Pacific Northwest, a lot of people think of this area as an area that is loaded with rainfall year round. When in actuality, June through September, we have very little rainfall. And that's actually the time when our gardens are growing the most. So irrigation is required. The variables that can come into consideration are rain, the wind, the temperature, and the soil makeup. So again, you can take these same things and look at your area to see what, if you're in like Southern California or Arizona, very dry, you may need to be able to even do more watering and conserving of the water to be able to use that for your gardens. How to check for moisture. You can use a rain gauge, you can use moisture meters, and these are tools that will help you to know how much water you're actually giving to your plants and how much rainfall is actually leaving for your plants that you're irrigating with. Consistent watering. It's critical to water consistently every week. Your plants need that, count on it. So it's best to water 2 to 3 times a week here locally in the Northwest. You want to water 1 to 1.5 inches per week. And sometimes when it's hotter, when you get up in the 80s, like we've seen in California and Southern Oregon right now, they're needing maybe 2 inches per week. Locally, there's a water facility here that actually puts out a water weekly alert to tell you how much water is needed to be able to water your gardens. Young plants, when they're first starting out to establish those roots, they need more water. A strong root system will give you a better supported plant that will be able to produce more crops for you. So it's critical to get them off on the right foot. You need to know your plants. Every plant has different needs. So different plants have different water needs. In other words, tomatoes. Tomatoes need a deep root system and need water to be able to get down deep to those roots for them to be expand and then to be able to give that nutrients back into the plant. One of the things that's critical as you're laying out your garden, and Richard will go into more detail with us a little bit later, is planning it out, graphing out where you're going to put your plants, keeping your plants that need the exact same water needs together in the garden, so that when you're setting up your watering system, they're going to provide the amount of water that you need for those plants. You don't have a tomato planted next to something like a garlic plant that doesn't need much water. Water in the soil, not the leaves. It's critical to not apply that water to the leaves because that's going to prevent diseases. It's going to create less evaporation and runoff, and it's going to be healthier for your plants and saves you money. A lot of people thought, by watering by hand, especially if you're spraying, the leaves, that water is being absorbed into the plant when it's really not. It's actually causing more issues. The best time to water is in the morning versus the afternoon or evening. That allows the plants to be able to dry out. So before 7 a.m., ideally, if you have a drip system or something that you've been able to set a timer with, 4 a.m. is a great time to be able to start your watering. AM watering reduces evaporation for your plants. It allows the water to dry off the leaves so that you don't have plant diseases. And it allows your plants to absorb more water. One of the things that's critical, and this is something that you need to understand, is the type of soil that you have to know how much water you need to apply to your soil. So a sandy soil, as you can see in the diagram here, allows for a lot of drainage, and that water then runs through the soil. Whereas a clay soil holds that moisture in and kind of collects it. If you dug into a clay soil, which we have a lot of here in the Pacific Northwest, you could fill that and it would just sit there, and you'd be able to see 10 minutes later that water's still sitting there. Whereas the ideal situation for your soil is a loamy soil, a mixture of sand, silt, and clay. And so knowing what type of soil you have will help you to understand how much water you need to apply to your soil for your garden to thrive. Checking your moisture. It's really important to be able to dig into the soil and squeeze the soil to know if it is too wet. You'll see a lot of moisture dripping out of the soil. If it holds just right, that soil is just perfect and you keep it the way it is. Or if the soil is dry and crumbly, you can see that what will happen is it will be too dry and you need to increase your water.
Maybe try that.
So it gives you a little bit of an idea of how that works. So again, good way to be able to get your hands into the soil and see and understand how your soil is made up and also how much moisture is in your soil. Another way to check for soil moisture is by sticking your finger into the soil. Real easy test, just stick it into the soil near the roots or near your drip or soaker system. See if your finger is wet and sopping where you know you got too much water. If it's just moist, you've got the right amount, don't need to do anything. Or if it's real dry, you need to increase the amount of water you're applying to your plants. Evaluating your plants for watering needs. As you can see in the picture here, this plant, it's a zucchini probably, and it's wilting severely. So it's telling you that it needs to have more water. If plants are healthy, continue your practices. If the leaves are wilting like this or yellowing, you need to increase water. But be careful. Sometimes if you get real extreme heat temperature swings in the afternoon, you don't want to apply water just because it's starting to droop a little bit. Allow the plant to recover, see how it looks, check the soil and see if there's moisture in the soil. If the plants have a fungus gnat, decrease the water. And if the plants have blossom end rot, be more consistent with your watering. That's probably one of the biggest issues that tomatoes have is a blossom end rot because of inconsistent watering, where you're applying too much water and it's depleting the calcium that the plant's taking up from the soil. Plant functions, the buds, are the undeveloped shoots from which leaves and flowers grow. The leaves absorb sunlight to manufacture plant sugars. The stems support leaves and buds, serves as a conduit for carrying the water and minerals and food. So it's your highway system, delivering that important nutrients and water to the plant. And one of the most critical are your roots. Absorb the nutrients and moisture, they anchor the plant in the soil, and they support the stems and store the food. So all of these functions are heavily reliant on the roots getting the water. And that's why it's so important that we're not dispersing that water where it's going to be evaporated, either through the leaves or causing diseases, but actually down deep into the roots. One of the last critical pieces is applying a mulch. And mulch can be an organic matter, sawdust, leaves, straw. And what this does is it keeps the plant much cooler and reduces the amount of water being evaporated. There's a lot of different ways, as you can see in this picture. There's a mulch around the plants after you've planted, and then you have a walking path mulch. Another option for a mulch is using this straw, and you can apply that after planting. Again, it reduces the water needs. It keeps the plants cooler, reduces the weed germination, and it allows you to be able to see if you have any issues with diseases or bugs so that you can attack those right away. And now I'll turn it over to Richard and he'll go on with the irrigation.
So thanks, Ron. That's great background information for us. So as you probably are aware, there are lots of different ways to irrigate your vegetable garden. And a lot of us are very familiar with using watering cans and hoses. And we're probably also familiar with tangled hoses and running over our hoses with our lawnmower and other ideas around that. And another way a lot of people water is with overhead sprinklers. And you've all, I'm sure, seen that or experienced it yourselves as well. Another way that's common is soaker hoses. And there are round soaker hoses and there are soaker hoses that are flat. The flat soaker hoses have holes on both sides, and you can either turn the holes down and water directly into the soil, or turn them up and they kind of sprinkle into the air. And finally, drip irrigation has become an interesting and more popular way of watering in a vegetable garden these days. So hoses and watering cans, they're not very expensive, but they are time consuming. And they do cause plant diseases because they're watering your leaves. They're putting water on your leaves. And that is a source of a lot of our fungal diseases and problems. There's also more runoff when you water with hoses or watering cans. And it's very difficult to measure exactly or precisely how much it is that you're really watering. Here's some other examples of overhead sprinklers. And you can also see there some hand sprinkling methods as well. It's good for lawns. Overhead sprinklers are fine for lawns. The equipment doesn't cost a lot, but they're not very good for gardens. And like I said before, there's a lot of plant diseases caused by watering with overhead sprinklers, again, because they're watering the leaves, not the soil. And there's a lot of evaporation and loss of water through evaporation. And water costs money more and more all the time. It also, when you water with sprinklers, overhead sprinklers, you're just promoting weed germination because you're watering all the soil. And there are millions of seeds in that soil just waiting to germinate. And it's time consuming. It takes time to stand there holding the hose or setting up your sprinkler system. And time is money. Here's another example of commercial agriculture overhead sprinkler systems. They're inefficient, they waste water, they cause disease. The diseases mean you've got to probably use some herbicides or pesticides, and also this causes weeds. Soaker hoses, we've got a couple of different types. Like I said, the flat and the round kind. And they do water the soil, not the leaves. So that's a good thing. And there is less evaporation but there is some runoff. And also you're going to save some time with your soaker hoses once you get them set up and placed in your garden where you want them. And there's some reduction in weed germination, and they will use a lot less water. They're not as efficient as drip irrigation, but they're probably somewhere, they're not as efficient as drip irrigation, but they do a pretty good job. The cost for using soaker hoses is somewhere between sprinklers and drip. Drip irrigation wastes very little water. It waters when and where you need the water. It's very efficient, up to 90% efficient, and that's time and money. They control weeds because they're only watering where you need the water. The water is going directly to the roots. It's reducing soil erosion because the water is not running off the land, and you're precisely watering where you want it. It also conserves nutrients because you're not washing away your nitrogen fertilizers. It's not flowing into your lakes and streams nearby because you're just watering right where you need the water. It may be a little more expensive to set up, and some people have found it intimidating to install, but we're going to try to make you feel a little more comfortable about that today. So here's a short video about drip irrigation, which will give you some understanding of it.
So you're thinking about drip irrigation. It's a smart move. You're going to love it and your plants are going to love it. But you're worried about how much work it's going to take to set all this up. Don't worry, we're going to show you just how easy it is to set all this up and have your garden watering itself in no time. It all starts here at the faucet. What you have going on here is first a filter to make sure nothing's going to clog your system. The next is a pressure regulator, which is going to bring the water pressure down to a level that your drip system can use. Next is a timer, which is going to come in valuable because you're going to forget that you have your drip irrigation system on. And all of this connects to your drip system with a female hose beginning. This may seem complicated, but if you can connect a hose, you can attach all of this stuff because it all just screws right onto one another. The main irrigation line bringing water around your garden is 1/2-inch tubing. Attaching your 1/2-inch main line to these couplings couldn't be easier. Dip the end of your 1/2-inch main line into some hot water. This softens up the plastic. When the plastic is nice and soft, you just slip it over the end of the fitting and then tighten the fitting around it. Now, to attach it to the hose apparatus, just screw it right on. Laying out your drip system is as easy as digging a little trench with a trowel, running your hose down in it, and holding it down with some hold downs. Now, adapting your drip system to where it needs to go is easy. You can either use elbows to go around corners, or you can use T's to split off other lines. They both attach the same way, which is extremely easy. I have my hose laid out and I know where I want my T to go to branch off down into a bed. So the first thing I do is make a cut in the hose. You can use your hand pruners, you can use a pair of scissors, you can use a utility knife to cut this tubing. It cuts very easily. The fitting's attached just like the other ones. Dip it in hot water if you need to. Slip the main line onto the fitting and screw the fitting on. Now we'll attach the other side. Then I attach a new piece of tubing off in the new direction I want to go in. And there it is. Now it's time to add your emitters. And like everything else with this system, it couldn't be easier. You start with a hole punch, which you can buy where you buy all of your drip irrigation supplies. You find the place on your main line where you want to add the emitter. You just punch a hole and pop in the emitter. Now, if you make a mistake like I did here with my first attempt, where I just wasn't too happy with where this hole was placed, make sure you buy something called a goof plug, which plugs up all your goofs. Just simply pop it into the hole that you don't want to be there, and you're good to go. Now you'll be providing water to the plant you want, not to the weeds you don't. To make your drip system even more flexible is tubing that has emitters already built into it. They come with the emitters spaced either every 6 inches or every 12 inches. And this is great for weaving in and around existing plantings. You attach the same way you attach all your other emitters. You start off with a hole in the main line tubing. Instead of putting in an emitter, you put in a 1/4 inch barbed connector. You put the end of the 1/4 inch tubing over that connector. As you weave this around your plantings, use hold downs to keep it in place. If you have a plant that likes a little bit more water, you can wrap it around twice to make sure it gets more water than others. And if you have a plant that doesn't need as much water, you can keep it kind of far away. And stop the end with a goof plug. There's nothing more tedious to water than your container gardens, and your drip irrigation system can help with that too. What I've done here is taken 1/4 inch tubing that doesn't have emitters in it, attach it to my main line, and I'm going to run it up through the bottom drainage hole in this container. After running the 1/4 inch tubing up the bottom, I filled it with soil I then attach the 1/4-inch tubing to some of the 1/4-inch tubing that has emitters in it. And I run that around the rim of the container, about 1 inch in from the sides, and hold that down with some hold downs. Now the plants in your container garden will be watered at the same time all your other plants will be. Now when it comes to capping the end of your system, there are 2 ways to do it. There are fittings that attach the same way that all our other fittings attach, and that unscrews to allow you to drain it at the end of the season. Or there's something even easier, a figure-8 ending. The figure-8 ending goes on quite simply. You slip one end over the end, you bend the hose, and slip it over the other end, and you're all set. And at the end of the season, you can just slip it right off and drain it. The only other care your system's going to need is to bring in the filter and the timer over winter. Other than that, everything should be all set. It was as easy as I told you.
I'm trying to do that.
Now hit the.
All of this connects to your drip system with a female hose beginning. This may seem complicated, but if you...
You're gonna have to hit escape, I think. I don't know if it's not gonna- Did you hit escape?
Yep.
Okay.
Oh, here we go. I think we're good. Okay. Okay. So sorry about that. Oops. Now we need. So I hope that was a helpful video, short and simple video about drip irrigation to get you started. And what I recommend is before you start putting a system together, that you go out with a tape measure and into your garden and just lay out where you think you want your drip irrigation. And using a piece of graph paper with each square representing 1 square foot, mapping out your drip irrigation plan, where you want your plants, where you want to water, where is that in relationship to your hose bib or your faucet, and what kinds of different plants you're going to be watering. And so, like I said, here what I've done is I've laid out with a piece of graph paper my plan for my vegetable garden. And as you saw in the video, they use, mainly most of you are going to want to use a 1/2 inch tubing, polyethylene tubing for your main line. And then you're going to branch off that with a 1/4 inch tubing for your drip line. And again, as they said in the video, you're going to have a head assembly, which we're going to show you piece by piece how to put that together in just a minute. And that'll be right next to your faucet. And your couplers and connectors, I've indicated here with a little bit darker black pin. And then the emitters, I don't know if you can tell, but I've used different colored pencils and pens to indicate my different components in the garden. And I use the black for main line. I used a red for the 1/4-inch drip line tubing, and then I used little blue dots for where I was going to put my emitters. And then in the bottom left-hand corner, I showed you the head assembly where you're attaching to your hose bit. Okay. Yeah. So here's what the drip irrigation head assembly looks like. And I know there's a lot of vocabulary with drip irrigation that may be unfamiliar. And I hope we're going to be able to give you a place where you can get in touch with some of these vocabulary terms that are used in drip irrigation. So a manifold or a Y valve is a good idea to begin with, because even if you've got your drip irrigation attached to one set there, you're going to want to have a way to access water that you can just hook up with a hose. And that's why we either use a Y valve or a manifold where you can switch off 2 or 4 different zones using the valves and the manifold. As you see in the photograph here, you've got the timer next. This also has a backflow preventer from getting to prevent contaminated water flowing back into your house water supply. There's also a pressure regulator and a filter. And then at the very end of that, of course, you have to have some way to attach that to the 1/2-inch mainline tubing. And that's called an adapter, hose thread adapter. And there's 2 different kinds of thread. The pipe thread is a thread used at your faucet, and it's different than hose thread. They are, you have to have some way to connect and adapt from one type to the other. So this is one example of a drip irrigation kit that some company has put together for a certain size garden area or drip irrigation project. And as you can see, they've got the 1/2-inch and the 1/4-inch tubing. They've got a hole puncher included. They've got emitters, and they've got the goof plugs that were talked about when you make a mistake on your put a hole where you don't want one. And also they've got end caps, elbows, T's, valves, and landscape wire stakes to hold down the tubing. When you first get the 1/2-inch and 1/4-inch tubing, it'll be coiled and it will not want to kind of straighten out. So the best thing to do is leave it out in the sun for a couple hours, let it get nice and warm. And then once you stretch it out where you want it to go, use your landscape stakes to hold it down the way you want. So I know there's a lot of information here, and what we also are going to have available for you is a list of internet resources and a bibliography here. So here's just our resources are mostly from YouTube, and a lot of those are connected also with the OSU Extension Center, Master Garden Extension Center, either in Lane County, or there's one up in Clackamas County, Washington. And so you'll have access to these, and a lot of the OSU ones have catalog numbers, as you can see. And so this will be available to you as well. So in conclusion, whatever option you choose, don't be intimidated to install soaker hoses or drip system. There are many installation videos that will take you step by step through the process. And there are many companies online that are very interested in selling you equipment and materials, and also, though, showing you how to use the drip irrigation components that you're buying from them. So obviously, you've all seen Rainbird, Orbit, dripdepot.com. There are lots of different places. There's even in the box stores, a cheap $30 kit that you can buy, which is kind of a introductory system for drip irrigation for those of you just starting out. So we're going to show you the bibliography again, and then we're going to set up some different things just to give you some familiarity with what it's like to put some of these components together and what some of these things are that we've been talking about. So here's your bibliography and resources again.
While we're getting set up here too, you can get some questions to Juliet and she'll pass those along to us to answer a few questions while we're getting set up here.
Okay.
Yes, we have a number of questions already. People can put more in the Q&A box. I also want to mention that our next online seminar will be Monday, July 22nd at noon, where we will talk about providing information on planting a fall winter garden. So about what to plant and when, and so I hope you can join us for that. But let me go to some of the questions here. The first question is, if only the bottom leaves of the tomatoes are yellow, are they too dry or do they lose their leaves?
Typically, you will see tomatoes losing the bottom leaves will be turning yellow, and those can be clipped off so that way you're not going to be getting diseases. Again, it's good to also check, the moisture in your soil, and you can use, either the hand test by getting a handful of the soil or putting your finger down in it to be able to see if it's moist down 3 to 6 inches.
Okay. Another question, as long as there's enough organic matter, maybe a 5-to-1 ratio of organic matter to soil by weight, are there some plants that actually prefer a clay soil over perfect loamy soil?
Not sure if there's any that prefer the clay soil. I know a mixture is always good for the plants. The problem with the clay soil is if it's too heavy clay, it's going to retain all that moisture and your plants are going to be the roots are going to be sitting in that water.
Yeah, then they go on to say, are there any such plants not considered invasive? But I'm not sure edible gardening those plants would be invasive anyway. Another question, can you apply straw mulch after seeding veggies, or do you need to wait for plants to sprout first?
You can for some plants. It's ideal to let the plants, get started, but some things like carrots and lettuce, it'll help to retain the moisture and actually cause the plant seeds to germinate. So using a really thin layer of mulch, either straw or you can use sawdust or light wood chips or shavings, can actually retain the moisture and help to germinate really small seeds like carrots, radishes, and lettuce.
Yeah, they go on to say at what depth should you mulch, and they'd like to use straw, but they're worried about the seeds. Any suggestion on where to purchase straw or what kind to get?
There's organic ones that you can get. Again, you have to be careful with, where that was grown and what it was used as far as chemicals and pesticides. Organic is probably the best route to go. Then you're eliminating anything like that. And typically for a mulch for a vegetable garden, you want about 1 to 3 inches. Again, it's protecting not only the top of the soil and retaining that moisture, but you're also allowing either the drip system or the soaker hoses to be protected also. Again, it'll extend the life of your soaker hoses or your drip system.
Okay, take one more comment and then we'll move on to the demonstration. This is a comment. What I found with soaker hoses is that the first 5 feet get a decent amount of water, but there isn't much water going to the end of the hose. It was a new hose of about 25 feet.
That's a good reason for preferring drip irrigation to soaker hoses, because that's often what happens is you get uneven watering over the length of the hose, and the last part of the hose won't get what you need.
So do you have more questions or do you want to go to the demonstration? We can come back to Q&A.
We can do a little bit of demonstration, and then maybe that'll generate some more questions as well.
Okay, we have more already still, but go ahead.
Okay. Well, I thought maybe it was worth showing you some of the things we were talking about before, and these are some different ways you would hook up the drip irrigation system to your hose bib or your faucet. And here's just a Y valve where you can turn off the hose, or you can turn on the hose, and you can turn on or off the drip irrigation. Here's a 4-zone manifold where you could hook different ones to different zones. And of course, I'd recommend leaving at least one for just a hose to do some hand watering or cleaning. And here's just a single one with a valve on it. And I wanted to show you the assembly situation where you're hooking up your head assembly. Here's where it attaches to the faucet. And here is a simple $9 manual timer. Requires no batteries. You just twist it and it will turn on the water for a certain number of minutes. The next thing that we usually attach to that is your backflow preventer. You just screw it on. All these components are all hose thread. The only thing that's pipe thread is this first one where you're attaching to the faucet. Next is a filter. Here's your filter here. And again, just hose thread, attach it right to your other head assembly pieces. And then this is your pressure regulator to make sure that you're not having too much pressure in your system. Most of your household systems work well with about 25 pounds per square inch. And this just attaches right on the end of there. This is 25 PSI. It regulates the amount of pressure going into your hose system. And finally, we talked about an adapter, which is just this little piece. It can be straight or elbowed. And again, attaches right on the end. And this is where you're going to go from hose thread right onto the end of your your mainline tubing. So this is hose thread, and here's your mainline tubing here. You just push them in together. Helps if they're warmed up a little bit. And then once they're connected, tighten it up. Good. Another thing that we haven't talked about is it is possible to convert a sprinkler system into a drip irrigation system with a little component like this. It's called it converts a sprinkler system, lawn sprinkler, into drip irrigation if you want to try that. And then, of course, I thought maybe it'd be a good idea just to show you this is the hole punch, which you would punch into the mainline tube. That's your half inch tubing. You just set it on here and squeeze it together. You can hear the little pop, and then you've got a hole. I don't know if that's showing you a little bit. And then, of course, from there, you can do a number of things. You can insert a little connector, which is connected. You hear it snap. That kind of lets you know that it's in place. And this one was on the end of a little sprayer or sprinkler type of drip connector. And you can adjust the end. To adjust how much water you want to be spraying and how far you want to be spraying. I'll show you also when you put a plug in the wrong place. Here's your little goof plugs. So you just get a goof plug and you're able to plug up that hole. There. So now you're closed in the hole that you just made in the wrong place. Here's your tees for a half-inch main line. There are also tees for 1/4-inch tubing. There's also just when you want to connect 2 half-inch pieces. Oh. Over here. Yeah. So you connect the 2 half-inch pieces. And what else have I got? The other thing I wanted to say was when you're connecting using pipe threads, you should use this type of synthetic tape. You don't need that when you're using hose threads, but you do need it when you're using pipe threads to just keep things from leaking. And here's some example of your landscape connectors. And we recommend some kind of system where you keep track of all your different pieces in a little, either a fishing tackle box or something, so that you keep separate types of emitters and sizes of emitters in different places, so you don't get them confused or mixed up. There are half-gallon per hour emitters, there are gallon per hour emitters, there are 2 gallon per hour emitters, and they're usually color coded on the ends. And then, like I said, there's also little emitters that have sprayers on the end of them as well. Okay, so maybe that's generated some more questions. Juliet, did you?
Yeah, we have a number of other questions here.
Okay.
Speaking of plant disease, should I always use fresh water or can I use captured runoff or even gray water? Does my runoff need to be sealed and covered as well?
I don't have the answer on that one. I've always used the tap water.
Yeah, if your runoff, if you have I would just say if you think your runoff water may be suspect, have too much fertilizer in it or too much other chemicals that you don't want, then I wouldn't use the runoff water. But otherwise, why not? We're not experts in that area.
One other thing I'll comment on that Richard was talking about too is in all of these products that he was talking about, it's real important to use one product line. Don't mix the different brands because they don't always fit together the same and you'll end up with a lot of leaks. So whatever system you end up putting in, it's a good idea to stick with one brand all the way through from the beginning, from the hose bib all the way through to the end.
Can soaker hoses be fed occasionally from a rainwater collection system?
I don't think there's enough pressure to do that because usually a rainwater system, you're just got a 55-gallon drum and it's only generating a small amount of pressure, which I don't think is going to push through those holes in the soaker hose.
Are backflow valves also recommended and where can you find those without ordering online?
Yeah, I demonstrated putting together that head assembly, and it did have a backflow preventer in that system, and you buy that right when you're buying your emitters and your drip line and your mainline tubing.
Some of the newer faucets for outdoor faucets even have those built into the faucet. I know that when I had mine replaced this last time, that was one of the recommendations the plumber said is to actually have that put right on the faucet. So I actually have one on my faucet.
And where would you recommend buying them?
Pretty much any facility, garden facility, or a place online where you're looking at the drip systems, you should be able to find those parts.
How often do you need to replace the filter or clean it if reusable are available?
I think it kind of depends on where your what your water source is. I have well water, and I'm going to be looking at my filter quite often because I know that it has a lot of iron in it and potential for a lot of other contaminants. So I would just, and there are several different types of filters. There's one where the filter is actually off to the side a little bit, where you don't have to take apart the whole system in order to examine the filter and clean the filter out. And I would recommend, it's a couple dollars more than the other kind, but I would recommend that one just because you can clean it without dismantling your whole head assembly.
This person says they have a patio garden without a faucet. Do you have a suggestion for using a gravity feed drip system with a 5-gallon bucket, etc.?
There are drip irrigation systems that will work with a 5 to 10 gallon per hour pressure. I'm not, when you would go online to buy and look at your system, just make sure you get equipment that's going to be compatible with that type of low pressure system. But there are some that will work that way. And and this may be one of the examples is, check on this, but like a 1/4-inch drip tubing with a goof plug in the end as a end cap. Some of those drip lines already have holes manufactured into the drip line every 6, 12, or 18 inches. And that might be a good solution for somebody with low pressure, but I would check with the company you're buying the equipment from to make sure that's going to work for you.
What is the expected useful life of a drip irrigation system before you have to replace materials?
I think to some degree it'll depend on it is polyurethane tubing, so it is susceptible to UV light, and it will break down after a few years. A good solution for that partly is mulching or burying your drip irrigation. Maybe you start out when you're first putting it together just on the surface of the ground, but once everything's working and you see that there's no leaks, either bury it under the ground a few inches or put some mulch on top of it to protect it from UV exposure. But you should be able to get, even so, 2 or 3 years out of it without replacing anything.
Yeah, and I think if you have the mulch, they can last up 5 years or more. One of the things, again, during the wintertime, you want to remove your timer because if you have a heavy freeze, you could end up with some issues there, and disconnect it and make sure that you clean out the system too, in case there is any debris in it. Flush it out.
Okay. Are Oya irrigation pots comparable in efficiency and water conservation to drip or soaker irrigation?
I haven't done any research with that, so Richard, I don't know if you have.
I haven't either, but it's certainly simple. It's certainly cheap. And it was one of the first systems they were using 9,000 years ago. They were burying terracotta pots in the ground next to their plants. And that was one of the first irrigation methods used 9,000 years ago. And some people are still using something similar today.
How do you clean drip systems?
Flush them out. Flush them out. Take off the end cap. Take off the goof plug, and just run water at high pressure through that system. And of course, clean out your filter at the beginning as well.
What connections can work okay with quick connectors rather than either hose threaded connectors or push fit pipe connectors?
Oh, I'm not sure. Could you say that again? I'm not sure I understood the question.
What connections can work okay with quick connectors rather than either hose threaded connectors or push fit pipe connectors?
Yeah, I have seen some quick connectors. Is he wanting to know the brand name or just what's you can buy those.
Which connectors work with them?
I think the biggest problem is going to be the pressure, that constant pressure that they'd be under. I would be making sure that you maybe check with the brand that you're buying of the rest of the connectors to make sure that that's feasible to be able to be used with it. And again, you want to stick with the same brand. So if the manufacturer has something that works with their brand of connectors for the drip system, then I would say that you're all right.
I know there are some online companies, when you're purchasing equipment, if you have a question about components and how well they work, or if they're appropriate for a certain function, you can call them or chat them, and they will get. My company, they got back to me the next morning, and I had the answer right then, is whether it was appropriate or what was the appropriate connector for that system. So I just asked.
Someone is asking for you to show again the blue conversion piece. And what was it called? An aqua drip? And what is the brand?
Yeah. It's called Acu Drip, ACU -DRIP, Water Conservation Simplified. And this one was a 2 gallon per hour, 4 outlet blue bubbler. I've got a picture of it here if we want to go back to the other camera. We can do that at the end of the presentation if you want to.
Okay, we just have a one or two more questions, and then I think we probably have to close it down.
Okay.
My garden is on a slope and raised beds aren't in any order. I guess she's not be able to use those. So any recommendations?
Yeah, try to use the same size emitters for everything in a particular zone. In other words, if you have all plants that need 1 gallon per hour, put those all on the same drip irrigation zone. And if there's, for going down a hill, you're probably going to have to make some adjustments, because your gravity is going to pull your water down the hill. And so things at the bottom of the hill are going to be watered more than the things at the top of the hill, to some degree. But you're probably just going to have to do some trial and error there to get the right fit for your system.
And that's where in the picture, the diagram where the gentleman showed wrapping around the plants, if you have more water needed, you might need to do that type of system at the top, and at the bottom have, you know, very small emitters going down to those, because you don't want too much water getting to those plants, and the gravity is going to pull it down that direction anyway.
One last question, I think. Would drip irrigation work in a food forest?
And at what kind of forest?
Food forest.
Food forest.
I would think it would work anywhere. Again, you're managing the amount of water being delivered, and you're delivering it in a way that it's getting to the roots of the plants, which is going to be beneficial to keep from diseases from starting, from evaporation from occurring. So again, using that system is going to allow you to get the water to where it's needed.
And as with all of our irrigation methods, the key is you water and then you watch, and you see how the plants are reacting to the amount of water that you're giving. If you're giving not enough, the plant's going to tell you. If you're giving too much, the plant should tell you. So you're going to have to monitor it after you begin watering over the next week or two, and just see if you've got the right amount of water or not, and adjust.
Someone was asking if they'd like to share these slides with their HOA neighbors. So this will be available on our YouTube channel. So you will be able to watch these video later on and be able to present it to other people that you think could benefit from this information. So it has been recorded and it will be available online.
And Juliet, are we going to be able to send people out a vocabulary list and bibliography if they want that?
Yes, I think Jet could be able to do that.
Okay, what do they just contact the Lane County Extension Center? Is that how they ask for it?
I think Jet can send it out to those people that were on the on this chat
Oh,
On-
okay,
online.
very good. Okay,
People
Thank
that
you.
have signed up.
great.
So thank you too for doing this talk. Really appreciate it. I think a lot of people learned excellent information from you two today and learned how to be more efficient in their irrigation. So thank you both.
And
Thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity to share.
Thank everyone that was here today too. See you at our next seminar on July 22nd. So long.